If you are pregnant or you've recently had a baby, this podcast is for you. I am your host, Kath Bequee, a physiotherapist working in women's health and mum of three. Inside my online program, Fitness Mama, I just love helping support women to care for their bodies during pregnancy, prepare their bodies for birth, and support their after-birth recovery, helping them feel confident and strong inside out during this important stage of their lives. In this podcast, join me each week as we dive into all things pregnancy care, childbirth and postnatal recovery, helping you through every step of the journey. It is absolutely possible to feel amazing and confident in our bodies during this motherhood journey, and I want that for you. Come and say hi to me on Instagram at FitnessMama, and let's dive into today's episode. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Pregnancy, Birth and Recovery podcast. Today's episode is a fun one. This one's perfect for you if you're considering what type of pram you need to purchase, perhaps you're pregnant or you're in the market for a new pram. So today we're discussing picking the right pram for your family. And I am joined with Emily Stone, who is a mother of two young children and founder of the Babybee Group. And the Babybee prams, they're actually the sponsor of the podcast for this month. And I thought there's no one else who's better to ask than Emily. So in today's episode, we really get into the nitty-gritties of, what type of prams can be considered, what factors should be considered when purchasing a pram. So we talk everything from looking at the terrain that your pram's going to be on. For example, is it going to be on footpaths versus off-road? Do you need a rear-facing versus front-facing, the tandem versus side-by-side? We discuss types of wheels, weight considerations, size. So Emily really does take us step by step through all the factors to be considered before investing in a pram. And Emily also talks us through safety considerations. So she mentioned some really important considerations that I think this is worth all parents listening to. You can skip ahead to this part of the podcast episode. But yeah, she discusses 4 really important considerations. So I trust you're going to really enjoy this episode today. And before I dive into this episode, I do just want to thank you so much for supporting this podcast along the way. It is now well and truly over 3 years old. And I thank you so much for all your support and sharing this podcast with your pregnant friends too. So sharing, rating and reviewing this podcast is probably the most important way to help this podcast reach more people. So thank you so much. If you have shared this podcast with a friend or pregnant family member, or if you have rated and reviewed, a huge thank you. And if we can help just one more pregnant or postnatal mama have a wonderful motherhood experience, then that is amazing. All right, let's dive into this episode. Emily, thank you so much for joining me today on the Pregnancy, Birth and Recovery podcast. This is a really fun topic, one I've been looking forward to speaking to you about. We're discussing, as I mentioned in the intro, but picking the right pram for the family. And I remember this was really stressful because there's so many things to consider when you're pregnant. So I'm really excited to chat because I think we're going to really dive into a few, like what to consider and a few of those important things to think about before purchasing a pram. So thank you.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Let's get straight into it, Emily.
Yeah.
How do you go about choosing a pram?
So I know that for the first time expecting parent, it can seem so overwhelming. And you don't know, what you need to consider and do I need these features or not? It feels overwhelming at the start, but it doesn't need to be. I think the number one thing that I say to first-time expecting parents is to just take a minute and think about your lifestyle and how you and your family are going to be using the pram first. So it's important to think about how you'll use it every day. Are you going to be taking it in the car every day, or is it just going to be set up in the garage and you take it for walks? Where do you live? So are you going to be mainly walking on sealed paths, or do you have a creek nearby and you'll be off-road a lot? So considering all of these things and trying to get to some sort of prioritised list of features that are actually going to be important for your family, I think is the most important thing. Word of mouth and reviews are really, really important, and I definitely recommend looking at all of those things. But just keep in mind that what's really important for your bestie may not be the same for your family. So she might be really tall, she might be really strong, and you're really small and feel like the weakest person in the world. Again, she may live in a different area. She may have a big garage and place to store the pram, and you're in a second floor apartment. So you've got to just come back to you and your family, what's going to be important. So we've actually developed a really good guide called the Ultimate Pram Buying Guide for first-time expecting parents. I don't know if we can link to it in the show notes. Otherwise, you can find it on the Babybee website. And that's a really good tool for just asking the right questions to help you narrow down to find out what those priorities are. So as I said, if you're going to be using it in the car, it's got to go in the car every day, then you're going to think about things like how compact it folds down. If you've got a small car boot, that's going to be particularly important. Also, how easy it is to fold. So if you're at the supermarket or you're wherever you are and you've got to be getting it down quickly to go in and out of the car, then a quick and easy fold is going to be a lot more important than if you're barely folding it down and it's just living in your garage and you take it out for walks. Other things to think about. So again, I mentioned sort of off-road. If you are going to be using it mainly off-road or off-road a lot on uneven ground, wheels are important. So when it comes to off-road, the front wheels and how big they are is what's most important. So if you can imagine a little travel stroller going along and you hit any kind of bump, it's just going to sort of stop and you'll have to lift it up a bit and keep walking. Whereas a really big jogging stroller with a big front wheel is just going to glide over it. So looking for a pram that has either standard full-size front wheels or bigger than that, which you'll typically see in your single to double prams or those jogging prams, that will be really important.
And on that topic of wheels, what can the wheels be made out of? Are there differences? Do they still use, this is how old I am, for my first baby, there were some wheels that you had to pump up. Is that still?
Yes. Yeah. So air tyres are probably less popular now, but they definitely still exist. Air tyres are great because they give you some extra cushioning. The downside is you can get punctures just like a bike. So there's a lot of maintenance involved. You've got to, even if you don't get a puncture, you've still got to pump them up every now and then just to make sure that they're nice and firm. If you get a puncture, then you've either got to repair it or replace the wheel. So
and imagine if your baby's crying and you really need to get them home and you've got a punctured tyre.
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, that's it. So these days there's sort of two main materials that most pram companies will go for. The first one, EVA, you'll find, which is a type of plastic, is used on your lightweight travel strollers. It's the lightest material that there is and it's the cheapest material. So you, with a travel stroller that's got to fold down for overhead cabin baggage on a plane and you're picking up all the time, you really want the lightest possible stroller. That's what you're prioritising. So those wheels are great. However, if you go over gravel and rocks and things, you'll start to see dents and little marks, and you might even see some gravel stuck in those wheels. So they do wear out. I guess the next step up from that is what we call PU rubber, and that will really outlive the pram, those wheels. So you won't see, if you can do the fingernail test, you can dig your fingernail in, and if it is EVA, you'll see that the mark remains in the wheel. But if it completely disappears, then it's PU, and you know that you've got something that's going to last forever. The majority of prams will use the PU, PU rubber.
Good tip.
Yeah.
But you probably don't endorse going into pram shops and sticking your fingernail.
Well, look, that's why we call it the fingernail test, because it really doesn't leave much of a mark. So
okay.
Just discreetly, no one's going to notice.
But you didn't hear it from Emily.
Not from us.
Too funny. Okay. Good to know. I never understood that. And so that's a really good tip for the first pram. Right. So you've talked about terrain. You've talked about size, like in the boot.
Yep.
That's massive, because if you've got a pram that takes up the whole boot and then you've got no room for shopping, that's something to consider, especially when more babies come on the scene.
Yes. Yep, absolutely. And also the other thing that goes along with that is weight as well. So if you are going to be regularly lifting up your whole pram and having to put it in the boot, you might want to look for something that's a bit lighter. Again, if you feel that you're strong enough, it's really only like a second that you're lifting this up into the car. So it just, again, that's why it's important to think of your lifestyle and what's important to you. And if you don't think you'll have an issue picking up a big pram to put in your boot, then that's fine. You don't have to look at all the weight limits or the weights of each of the prams that you're considering.
And this is when my mind starts to boggle, because really, like honestly, there's no one pram for each family, right? Every family would probably need multiple prams. And I know, having had 3 children, you do end up going through multiple prams because the kids grow, your circumstances change, you go to, on holidays, you can't be taking a big pram. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. And it's what a lot of our customers end up telling us as well. Over the length of their whole parenting journey, which might be a number of kids, they end up with, I'd say on average, 4 prams is what we hear. But we hear people telling us that they've had 10 prams as well.
Wow.
So, you start with one, and most of the time that's going to be your full-size single pram. And then Bub gets a bit older, they're over 1, maybe a bit older than that. And then you're like, okay, I don't need the full size pram anymore. I want something that's just a bit lighter and a bit easier. And so then you might go to just an everyday single, or you might go down to a travel stroller. Or if Bub number 2 is on the way, maybe then you're looking at a double, an inline single to double stroller. Or once Bub number 2 comes along, we actually find a lot of customers do start looking at the side-by-side doubles as well, which are, I know they scare a lot of people because of the width, but they actually are the easiest of the double pram options to manoeuvre and to push.
Okay, well, let's explore that a little bit more. Let's say someone's listening to this, they're pregnant, first baby, but they're knowing or they're hoping to have multiple children in the future, and they want to plan ahead. How do you go about that? Because that's a lot of foresight you need in terms of, do you have a tandem? Has it got the capability of having a skateboard? So could you just talk us through a few of those things to consider?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing, so your 2 options would be a full-size single pram. You do have an option of adding a toddler board to most of those. So a toddler board is just a platform that toddlers usually 2 years and up can stand on and roll along behind. So you've got that option. But if you wanted the seated option, so 2 seats, you'd be looking at an inline single to double or a tandem stroller. So the benefits of future-proofing and going with something that'll take you from single to double is obviously that it can accommodate those 2 seats. The other big benefit is that you'll typically get a much bigger shopping basket underneath. So if that's going to be, if you're mainly doing a lot of shopping with your pram, that can be a really, really important factor. But the downside is that to accommodate those 2 seats, the pram will be bigger overall. So the footprint will take up more space. When it's folded, it will be larger. So again, if you've got a small boot, you've got to consider that. And they will be slightly heavier. There are two different types of tandems. So you either have your option that's really built as a single stroller, but then if you want, you can add in a little smaller seat. So it's not a fully functioning seat, but it's a smaller seat that usually would go and it looks like it's sitting in the basket. The other option is what we call a true double that will have two full-size seats. So that gives you all of the functionality. You can have the seats facing every possible direction. There's usually like 30 configurations and you've got a lot more flexibility. So those ones will be the largest and the heaviest.
So they would be good if you're going to have perhaps twins or older, like not just newborn baby in a double pram, but older children in a double pram.
Yeah, and I guess I would say that if you go for the smaller option of just having the smaller second seat, it's definitely not going to be as comfortable for your older child. So whilst they're in that smaller seat and the bub's in the bassinet, they're really cramped, they're down in the basket. A lot of customers say to us that if they've tried that option, it was just a struggle every day to try and convince their child to get into the pram. So when you go for the larger, true full-size double, there's going to be less fights because they're both in an equal seat and you've got plenty of different options depending on everybody's mood and how everyone's feeling, you can either face them together or face them apart or have one facing you and one out. Like you'll find something that can keep everyone happy.
This episode is brought to you by Babybee, Australian-owned and designed prams combining quality, safety and style. Not only does Babybee let you try their prams at home with free returns for 9 months, yes, that's 9 months, they also offer an industry-leading 3-year warranty for total peace of mind. With thousands of 5-star reviews, around-the-clock customer care, and up to $300 of free accessories with every pram, what are you waiting for? Go visit www.babybeeonline.com and check them out for yourself. And yes, for listeners of the podcast, there is a 20% discount code. Enter FITBEE, FITBEE 20 at checkout, and T's and C's apply.
I always had to face them apart because otherwise it'd be poking and oh my gosh. Okay, well let's talk about that tandem versus double side by side. Can you talk us through the pros and cons of each?
Yeah. So the side by side is generally preferred for parents who have twins. So you've got both the kids next to each other. There's no fighting, and because the kids are going to be the same age, as they grow and they get heavier, it's actually a lot easier to push a side-by-side where the weight is distributed really close to your body. They're both just directly in front of you, so it's easier on your arms as you're turning around corners, whereas if you've got one heavy child out in front and then one directly in front of you, to turn is more like trying to turn a bus around, if you could sort of...
Yeah,
hopefully not as heavy as a bus, but it is harder than having the weight, right close to your body.
Yeah, that makes sense. I hadn't considered, like I knew that the tandems from personal experience were hard to push at times, but I hadn't considered the bar mechanics of that and that they would be easier when both close together. Yeah.
And so with the side-by-sides, most of them will only have forward-facing seats, so they only face out. You can't turn them around to parent face. So for some parents, especially when their kids are young, they just want that parent-facing option. There are prams on the market that do that. You can face the seats and the bassinets either direction, but the downside of those is that they are then really big packages. So to fold them, they're huge. You really are going to have a very big car to transport them. And there's also extra steps involved. You've got to take the seats off and the bassinets off, whereas just a forward-facing double side by side, it will just fold in one. You don't take the seats off, they're fixed seats, folds in one movement and then straight into the car. So it takes up a lot less space.
Oh, I hadn't considered that.
Pros and cons to everything.
Yeah.
We always say there is no one perfect pram out there. So if you're looking to everyone to tell you what the perfect pram out there is, there isn't one. It doesn't exist. That's why I sort of stress that it comes down to your family's preferences and your lifestyle.
And with the side-by-side prams, can you put a capsule or a bassinet in them?
For most you can. So it just depends on the model and the brands and whether or not they will accommodate car capsule adapters.
Yeah.
The capsule. Okay. Yeah.
Right. Can we talk a little bit, you've already touched on it, but can we discuss forward-facing versus rear-facing, pros and cons, and let's talk also about the stage of baby development perhaps?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess, the journey that your bub will go through from birth to around 4 years, it's typically going to start off with a bassinet. Bassinets are what experts say is the safest form of transport for a newborn. So they'll start off in that flat surface, and bassinets will always be parent-facing. If you decide to use a car capsule that is compatible with your pram, you have that option as well. So you can swap out between the bassinet and the capsule. And the car capsule, for those who aren't aware, this is a whole nother thing that we could spend another hour talking about. The car capsule, there's a base that you'll put into your car and secure in your car. That base will stay in your car. The capsule can then be clipped on and off the base. So when bub falls asleep in the car, you don't want to wake them. You can unclip the capsule from the car and then take it inside, or if you are out and about, you can then put it onto your capsule adapters on the pram and they can continue sleeping. So you've got those two options when they're young. Again, the capsule would be parent-facing. Once they're around 4 to 6 months, and the key thing that you're looking for here is that they can hold their neck unaided, then they can transition into a seat. So the seat, again, you can have just forward-facing seats. Ideally, it's a reversible seat, so you can parent-face them. It's good to parent-face once they've transitioned from the bassinet in the early months till at least around 1. When they're parent-facing, it's just really nice for your bond to be able to have that time facing each other, but it's also really good for their language development. So if they're facing you, you're more likely to be chatting away, and then they're watching you and looking at your mouth, and that's really great for speech development as well. You can at any time turn them around. It's not that it's unsafe when they're forward-facing by any means. So at any time they can turn around then. And then after that, as I've touched on, you've got the option of toddler boards or the second seat in the pram.
I liked having them facing me in those early days, just also so that I could hand them things easily, or else even when they got older, because they'd always want something, or you're worried that they're undoing their seatbelt, and then if you had them facing you, you could at least have an eye on them. Yeah,
I think especially for the newborn, the first 4 months that are really important, it is important to have them, if you can, right in front of you, close enough to touch and facing you. There are, just to keep in mind, if you are looking at future-proofing and the tandem doubles that we've talked about, not all of them will accommodate the bassinet up the top parent-facing. In a lot of them, the bassinet actually has to be in that lower position at the front. That's just one thing to keep in mind. If you are considering future-proofing, definitely look for one that can accommodate a bassinet up top, where you'll be able to keep a very close eye on them.
Yeah, makes sense. Right, so we've talked about terrain, forward-facing, rear-facing. Are there any safety factors that I know you've just mentioned it a little bit then, but are there any other safety considerations we need to be aware of?
Yep, good question. So the good thing to note that will hopefully reassure everyone, is that all prams sold in Australia, they do need to comply with the Australian mandatory standards for prams and strollers. And we do have, I think, possibly the strictest standards globally. So you can rest assured that your bub is going to be in a safe product if it's purchased in Australia. The most common incidents that are reported to the Australian regulatory bodies are due to pram tipping and fall accidents. So the key things that you can do to avoid that is, number one, don't hang your nappy bag or any other bags from the handlebar unless the brand that you've purchased from specifies that you can do so. When they do all the stability testing with prams, unless a pram is sold with a bag that it actually comes in the same box, or the brand has specified that they want to test it with a certain weight, it won't be tested with any weight on that handle. So they go through very vigorous stability testing, and most of the time that doesn't include a bag. So then when you put even 1 or 2 kilos in your nappy bag over that, it then could be enough that it no longer would pass those stability tests. So that would be the first one. Second, just always make sure that bub is harnessed in. I know, being a mum of 2 myself, I know how chaotic it can be, and especially if they're throwing a tantrum or if you're just in a massive rush, it's just very easy to go, I'm only going around the corner to the car, or we're almost at the cafe, I won't worry about harnessing them in. But those accidents typically happen when you least expect it. So it can be as, innocent as bub seeing a flower and reaching over the side to try and grab the flower and they topple out, or maybe they are throwing a tantrum and they, jump up or throw themselves dramatically over the edge. Or it could be that you've
stand
stopped
up in the pram.
That's it. You've stopped to get something out of the basket or put something into the car, and they stand up on their own, which can be quite easy to do, and then they can fall. So I think if you just make it a rule for yourself that when they get in, strap them in, you can avoid those tipping and fall risks.
And how about the wrist strap? Do you recommend that?
Yes, absolutely. So that's something that a lot of people ask, what is this strap dangling from the handlebar? It's really funny listening to what customers have thought that strap has been for.
What have they said?
It's called a tether strap. So some people think it's to tether your toddler to the pram so they can't run away.
You mean the toddler on the skateboard?
Or just the toddler walking next to the pram so they can't run away from you.
But it's so short.
Yes, yeah. Well, I think they can still get their hand through while they're walking. But the reason that they're there is it's basically an insurance policy for your brake. So if every time you go to use your stroller, put your hand through that strap and then holding onto the handlebar, even if you're stopped for a second, you're not putting on the brake, if anything's to happen, the pram can't roll off. So unfortunately, years ago, there was 1 or 2 incidents where a pram did roll away, and they've brought that tether strap in as part of the Australian standards post that. So I definitely recommend, it doesn't even take a second to just put your hand through that strap.
I used to love that strap because I do remember it working a couple of times, especially when I had another toddler and the toddler, suddenly moved away, or I needed to reach for the toddler, and it was because the pram is tethered that I was like, I've got to keep hold of the pram because otherwise your tension's split and it can be so easy to let go.
And it doesn't take much for the pram to roll. It could just be, a massive gust of wind, or it could be your child throwing a tantrum and throwing themselves forward gives the pram a bit of momentum. If you're not on a 100% flat surface, it is.
Near roads,
possible. Okay. The other safety thing that I would like to touch on as well is going back to transporting newborns in a pram. So, as I said, experts recommend the safest way to transport a newborn is in a bassinet because of that flat surface. So that flat surface is the best position for spine development. It lets them stretch out as well as they need to. So especially if they're spending a bit of time in the pram, you would definitely want to be in a bassinet. I mentioned capsules. So some people will think, okay, I can avoid buying a bassinet. I'll just buy the capsule because it's only for the first 4 months, and then they can go into the seat. With a capsule, just keep in mind that they do have maximum time usage limits. So depending on the manufacturer, I don't think there's any 100% science to this, but it's typically around 2 to 3 hours max. After that time, you just want to take bub out for a little bit, give them a break before you put them back in. And the reason for that is that when they're in a capsule, or if they're sitting in a seat, in an upright seat, their spine is in a C curve position. And there's also a risk that if they're sitting in a seat, for example, that their head falls forward, and you're trying to avoid that C position where their head is forward, the chin to chest. Their little trachea or their breathing tube is only the size of a drinking straw. So if you then put the head forward, it just reduces the amount of oxygen substantially that can go through, which can be really dangerous over long periods of time. So that's why they just sort of say 2 to 3 hours. Around about that time, take them out. If they are in the capsule, give them, even if it's just a short break, 10 minutes before going back into the capsule. So that's why they want to be flat. You can, of course, put them on a flat lay seat. There are 2 types of seats in strollers. So we've got what we call a sling back or a flat lay seat, and that's where they're pretty much going to be on a completely flat surface. The back of the seat will recline separately to the base and the footrest of the seat so that you end up with a flat surface. The other type of seat is what we call a bucket seat. That's, as you can imagine, with a chair, you've got that 90-degree angle, and when you recline it, the entire chair tilts back rather than just the backrest. So whilst their back might almost be on a flat incline, their legs are going to be up in the air because their hips and legs are still on that 90 degrees. So again, the risk that they end up in that C position is greater. So we definitely don't recommend a bucket seat for kids under 4 months, even under 6 months. But the flat lay seat, as long as they're flat, that's totally fine. A newborn can go directly onto a flat lay seat. So I hope that's not too confusing.
So just go the bassinet, you're saying.
Flat is the best. Just think flat for the newborn. Yeah, is what you're looking for. Yeah.
Amazing. Is there anything you wanted to cover that we haven't yet covered?
The only other safety one, so and it's mainly to do with bassinets. A lot of bassinets that don't have any inbuilt or additional covers that can go over them, you'll be tempted to throw a blanket or a muslin cloth or something to just either keep the sun out of their face or the sun shining through, or to make it a bit warmer. It's actually quite dangerous to do that. Basically, if you're going to completely cover your bassinet and not have any airflow coming through, what happens is the CO2 can start to build up inside the bassinet, which can obviously be dangerous. The other thing is that depending on the weather, it can start to heat up as well. So even if it's not a super hot day, just a warm day, it'll start to warm up and get a lot hotter in your bassinet, especially with bub breathing in there. And babies can't actually control their temperature, their body temperature, like adults can. So it can it can heat up fast, and your bub's not going to be able to really tell you, which can be dangerous. So never, just as a rule of thumb, don't throw things over a bassinet. Or if you do, make sure that you can see that there's still room for air to freely pass through. I would recommend looking for bassinets that have inbuilt UV covers, so they will just flip out from inside of the canopy, and that will block out the sun for you. Again, make it a bit darker, good for naps, but you've still got plenty of airflow below it. There are other options as well, like clip-on UV covers and things like that, but look for those.
When I was in Europe before I was pregnant,
so
that was a while ago, it was in summer, everyone used a little umbrella It was an umbrella that you'd attach to the side of the pram and then you could angle it.
Yes.
And I haven't seen them in Australia.
They're just not that popular. So we do a lot of surveying of our customers at Babybee. One of our values is we listen to our parents, and to us that means we listen to our customers. And we do all this survey work to find out what they're loving and not loving about the pram, so we can continually update them and add new features, new accessories to make parent life easier. And it's definitely one thing that we've included in a lot of surveys over the years. And yeah, for some reason, people just don't have an interest. Maybe they think it's going to be too awkward having an umbrella on the side. I don't know. But
it was only a little umbrella. It was
they're
every
just
single
small
pram.
and they clip on very easily. Yeah. Yep, they just haven't taken
I wish
off
I'd
yet.
had one. I always wished I'd had the European pram.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, I think we've covered it all. Amazing, Emily. You have been a wealth of knowledge.
Well, I hope that's helpful. I know, as I said, it can be overwhelming, but if you can get your hands on a copy of that Ultimate Pram Buying Guide, as I said, it'll give you some great questions to help you work through, okay, what is actually most important to me and my family? And then hopefully you can then narrow down your pram search from there. So you can visit babybeeonline.com and have a look at all of our products there. And feel free to get in touch with our customer service team. They're all parents themselves and have been in your position, not knowing where to start with prams, and they'd be more than happy to give you a few tips and pointers to help you narrow down and work out which pram is going to make your life a whole lot easier. As I said, I hope I've given just a few insights that can make the whole process a lot more enjoyable for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, catch you soon. And before I sign off, remember my team and I will be putting together the show notes for this episode with all the links, including that checklist that Emily mentioned, at fitnessmama.com/podcast. Have a fabulous day, everyone, and I look forward to you joining me very soon for another episode of the Pregnancy, Birth and Recovery podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Fitness Mama podcast, brought to you by the Fitness Mama freebies found at www.fitnessmama.com/free. So please take a few seconds to leave a review, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and be sure to take a screenshot of this podcast, upload it to your social media, and tag me at Fitness Mama so I can give you a shout out too. Until next time, remember, an active pregnancy, confident childbirth, and strong postnatal recovery is something that you deserve. Remember our disclaimer, materials and contents in this podcast are intended as general information only and shouldn't substitute any medical advice, diagnosis or treatment. I'll see you soon.